Okay. And welcome again. My name is Emil Guillermo, and this is an Emil Amux Takeout. In the takeout box, Mel LaGasca. Mel, welcome. We're doing this as a part of our Stockton FANHS, our National FANHS Museum programming. Every Sunday, we usually do something, and I thought, what better thing to do than to have as our first guest in the takeout box, Mel LaGasca. Mel, thank you for being the first. You're not really a guinea pig, because we've done these before live, but because of our special circumstances, because of these special circumstances, we have to do things virtually. And how are you doing? How is your life during these COVID times?
On the personal end of it, we're adjusting. We realize I guess the magnitude of what's happening, and you might say we're working with the subject matter experts, the health people, not so much the politicians, but the health people are definitely on our radar screen, and their message is coming in loud and clear that we need to practice some new health habits, with the distancing and making sure that the sanitary things, our hands are clean, and we don't break any rules in terms of social distancing. So we're setting up a new set of parameters for living, and luckily we're both retired, so we have the luxury of doing something we've already been doing, but in a more confined space.
Yeah. Also, you don't have to worry about income so much, because if you're retired, you have your retirement income, and that's good compared to people who are reliant on creating income. So, and yet people who are older, and I'm in that category too, we are more susceptible to the things that are out there, to viruses spreading.
I did learn something specifically, being that I had allergies and asthma when I was younger. I have to be extra careful. And
oh yeah,
borderline diabetic. I need to take extra precautions. So I got to cut back on those pig feet adobo and that good stuff.
Crispy pata. Gotta watch out with the crisp. Well, as it is, everyone has time. And one of the things that I've done, besides taking on this volunteer position as museum director, is I have completed a nutrition study course with the T. Colin Campbell Center in Nutrition Studies at Cornell. And I have become certified as a nutrition kind of coach in a way. And I've learned a lot about how diet can help people get through or reverse conditions like diabetes and heart disease. Right. And this is something that I've been wanting to do because it's an issue for, it seems, not just Filipinos, but all people of color.
Yes, absolutely.
All people of color need to know about nutritional things. And hopefully in these programs, I can impart some tips or answer some questions about how nutrition can change, the path you're on if you are pre-diabetic or are diabetic or have heart disease. I mean, look, my family, Filipino, right? I come from a background or a past that includes multiple heart attacks, heart disease. And so that's one of the things I'd like to do in my writing and in my speaking. How nutrition can help people, since now we're all talking about health. We're all talking about health. And so, one thing I want to bring up, because we are living history in the sense that the San Joaquin County numbers came out. We both live in San Joaquin County. Stockton, where the museum is in San Joaquin County. And the latest numbers show that while Asian Americans are 14% of the county, we represent 17, almost 18% of the COVID cases in the county. So we, of all the groups, white, Black, Latino, only the Asian Americans outpace their numbers for COVID. Did you know that?
Yeah, it could be because of the volume of Asians in the medical profession and in educational profession, because they're, generally speaking, there's quite a few on the front line, you know, in, like you said, in terms of nursing and doctors and assistants, whatever type of position in the hospital, they're there.
Yeah. That's a good point. You know, the nurses and, you know, one of the things that I'm going to do with the museum is I do a meal amongst takeout and on a regular basis. And I talk to a Filipino nurse, and I'm going to share that with other people, you know, through the museum website, because the perspective of the Filipino nurse in 2020 is, I think, is very significant. They're on the front lines. They're like the infantry people, right?
Absolutely.
And you hear them talk about not having the PPE, you know, which does not stand for personal Pinoy equipment. PPE stands for the mask and the gowns, all the things that they need, right? The personal sneeze plates, you know, all those things. I joke about it because if you don't joke about it a little bit, it'll kill you, knowing the circumstances that these nurses go in. And the nurse I talked to said, you know, that's a Filipino way. We joke about these things even in the hospital, because if we don't joke about it, it makes the unbearable, you know, almost obscene, you know, because that they go expose themselves to the virus.
Balances out their work and their private lives.
Yeah.
And that's an important part. It's I kind of have that same philosophy, you know, in terms of community work, is that sometimes community work and like the museum can be very overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't use some humor as part of the work activity, and your production seems to kind of fall off the edge if you don't balance it out with something, if not necessarily humorous, but something outside of the normal challenges.
Well, you know, the thing is, it has to be enjoyable. It has to be, you know, if you're going to do volunteer work that's going to take you 60 hours a week to do, you better enjoy the work. And it better be fun. And you got to keep things light. And I think that's sort of the message for everything, whether your nonprofit or your volunteer endeavor is a nonprofit or a museum or politics or whatever, or putting up campaign signs. You got to keep things light and enjoyable. And remember that, you know, volunteers do things out of love. So you got to connect to the love part, right? And that's,
hit the nail on the head.
yeah, that's why we're here, right? Doing stuff for the museum, because we care about it. And we hate that it's closed. We hate that we have to stay socially distanced. But by doing things like Zoom, and our Zoom skills have gotten better, don't you think, Mel? Since this,
well, yeah, I think you're doing a tremendous job. I mean, I think everyone's learning from this, from the digital interaction, and we're starting to use it now with our grandkids. The two little guys back here are forcing my son and my daughter-in-law to Zoom, you know, instead of FaceTiming on the phone. Hey, we're going to Zoom, you know.
Yeah. Well, you can get the group involved. You can get everyone together. You can see, you know, multiple people. So that's kind of cool. So I just think that, you know, when you keep things light, it makes things, it eases things up a bit, makes things, it's kind of the new social lubricant, right? To get through these times. And so, you know, Mel, like I said, I appreciate you doing this, you know, because when I talked with some other members of the team, say, well, when we have these Sunday programs, we usually invite people to come talk about their book but for our first Zoom Sunday program, I thought, well, let's talk to someone who's really been a principal in the museum and has been part of this county and can talk about the history. And so your name came to the top of the list. And so,
Okay.
I just want to begin by another thing that I do is I do these sessions. They're sort of meditation, mental health type sessions, but we go back and we deal with our lives. And, I have this workshop that I do at the museum sometimes, like once a month, a story workshop. And I want to begin by doing something we call life story, where you go from birth to now in about 3 to 5 minutes, or I'm not going to keep a timer. Well, maybe I'll put a timer on you. If you go to, we'll do it in 3 minutes, but
Okay.
it 3 minutes is a long time, and we'll see what it reveals in 3 minutes. If you go
Mhm.
from birth to life or birth to now, talking about your life story. And okay, I'll have my timer here so I don't let you go too long. But go ahead.
Don't start rambling.
But no, go ahead. Birth to now. Share with us your life story.
Ready when you are.
Okay.
Um,
All right, go.
it's good. It's good to know the person that you're talking to. It's like Forrest Gump says, Mom told me not to talk to strangers. So
Yeah.
if you don't want to talk to a stranger, you got to know a little bit about them.
Yeah.
So I was born in Tacoma, Washington, in April 25th of '47. So I'll be a happy 73 this month. But my parents, my dad was born in the Philippines. He's Ilocano from Bigon, and my mom is Black and Irish. She was born in Tacoma, Washington. So voila, here I come along, and I have three other siblings: an older sister, an older brother, and a younger sister. So my younger sister, and I are the last of the Mohegans.
Hmm.
My mom was the oldest of nine, and she outlived all of her siblings. And when my dad passed away in '54, we moved from the projects in Tacoma, Washington to Stockton, California in the
Hmm.
summer of '54. So we established our roots in California since the summer of 1954. And I attended, for those who know Stockton, Jackson Elementary School, Garfield Elementary School.
Garfield.
Uh, yep.
That's where the shooting was.
Let's see. I was bused over to Stockton Junior High School, and then attended Addison. And while I was in high school, of course, you work in the fields, because that was I guess, the prominent, most dominating way of an individual to earn a living, um, by doing, farm labor work. So during high school, I worked in the fields, and I actually became a lascaro. My last years my last year in high school in '65, I ended up going up to Cordova, Alaska, and working 3 summers, 65, 66, and '67 in Alaska. So quite an experience to actually work in the fields with Manon, and then travel out to Alaska and work beside them in this cannery. So after, let's see, '67 is when I graduated, I guess, from Delta College while I was going to school and working, and then ended up working at Sandia National Lab, which was 180 degrees difference in terms of employment. Being a farm laborer, you don't have the amenities of retirement, paid leave when you don't work, you get paid Sometimes there's no restrooms out there. There's no office, no protection from the elements. Parking was an issue. If it rained, you know, you could be parking in the mud. Whereas in Sandia Lab, you know, I was on pavement. I was in a secured environment. I had a secretary, had my own office, and I spent 34 years there. So it was a like night and day in terms of the American dream, in that I had a retirement coming in, whereas a farm labor, there's no retirement.
Yeah.
You don't even think of the benefits, you know, not only the wages, but paid leave. At Sandia, I was given 6 weeks paid vacation when I walked to the door. So I was able to do my community work simply because I had this much time off. So going through, you know, fast forward, ended up retiring in 2002 with 34 years of service. And since I was, I guess, a year or so out of high school, I was been involved with different types of community stuff, mostly on a social scale initially, being involved with the basketball tournaments and the different Filipino athletic gatherings. I would especially get involved with the basketball tournaments because I ate long rice and I was a little taller than the rest of the folks there.
I know. I'm gonna stop you there, Mel, because you are a tall Filipino. I'm only tall. I'm only tall on Zoom. That's a, I'm as big as a little Zoom box. But I know you're. No, you. I let you go a little longer for people who are actually saying, okay, let's see if Emil is gonna let him go for 3 minutes. I let you go for about 5, but that's good because you got through the retirement at Sandia. And now we have some things to talk about. Let me give you some observances. Mel, you have lived the Filipino American historical profile, really. I mean, in one person, you are it. The fields to the Alascaros to, you know, to the professional life. I mean, I mean, I've known you and I've heard your story before, but hearing it all in that one little capsule, I think it's almost like watching the museum, you know, I could see the museum in your face right there. You know, it's you can go to and see the little, you know, the things on the wall at the museum, and every single portion of the history, you know, from, you know, the entertainment, hospitality, and the military. Well, you didn't mention the military. We'll get into that, but
Well, what happened was when I first hired in at Sandia in the summer of 1968, I was inducted.
Vietnam, right?
During the Vietnam era.
Mm.
Okay. But what happened was when I did go through the induction process, my doctor had written a letter that said, you know, my allergies and my the asthma that I was dealing with may be of interest, you know, to those folks that were in the induction process. So I get inducted and I go to Oakland along with probably a dozen or more of Stockton guys that I kind of went to high school with and people that I knew around Stockton. And when I gave this letter to the medical office, they determined that I was not 4F, but 1Y classification, which allowed me to not be inducted at that moment, but I was still eligible to be inducted. So as a result, long story short, I did a one-day turnaround. I went in on a bus and came back. I was the only one of the whole group that came back to Stockton. And actually I was employed by Sandia Lab, and I was totally terminated from Sandia Lab in 2 weeks. I only worked there 2 weeks. So I had to I guess, apply for my position. And luckily, Sandia held my position in that week, and I hired back in again. So I actually hold a record at Sandia Labs for being the shortest term employee and being rehired.
Well,
But it
yeah,
was
so
quite an experience.
so you were not 4F, you were 1Y.
1Y classification is I guess it means you have a medical condition that allowed you to be inducted, but at the same time, under certain circumstances, I guess if the war broke out on U.S. soil, I would be inducted.
Yeah. But
And
you know, you were kind of lucky though, because a lot of people were looking to dodge the draft at that time or not.
yeah, but I spent 34 years at a weapons lab, so I think I'd done my fair share in terms of supporting the military. After
Yeah.
my second year, after your second year working there, you get a certificate that says, I have a certificate in my office that says that you were part of the nuclear weapons program. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, the work that I did was, you know, it was classified. I started off in electrical drafting and kind of worked my way. I probably, over the 30 years, had at least 7 or 8 different positions within Sandia Labs. So it was quite an experience there to be in an environment where the learning was unlimited. It was totally up to you what you want to learn.
Now, Mel, I don't want to interrupt the flow of our talk, but I know for some reason I hear your sound. It kind of roboticizes at some point. So maybe it's maybe there's some feedback, or maybe there's some.
Maybe I'm too far away.
Yeah.
Is this a little better?
Oh yeah, that's a little better. Yeah. So.
Okay, I may have been doing my clean lean on my chair and
No, the lean is okay. It's just that there was a kind of almost like I said, I don't know if it's a latency issue, but there was you know how it sounds digitalized and it.
feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, but you're good now. So look, this is interesting because a lot of, like I said, you're the son, well, one thing that is missing from this is when your father arrived in the United States.
Yeah, it was
You were born in 47. When did your father arrive?
in 1934, I think 33 or 34.
From
And
what part of Manila, or what part of the Philippines?
he was from Vigan in northern Luzon.
Oh, vegan.
He built a house.
V-I-K-N.
Yeah,
Vegan, but they say vegan. So
Vigan.
and they have, they're known for those horse carriages in vegan.
Yeah, it's my understanding is heavily Spanish influence
Mhm.
in that area, and our last name LaGasca is a Spanish surname.
Well, it's just like my father is also from the northern Luzon area, from Ilocos, from Lawag City, and in fact, Guillermo is the patron saint of Lawag City. So if you want to call me Saint Guillermo, you may. I mean, but so there's our connection. We have our Lawagueño connection, even though the vast majority of Filipinos in Stockton seem to be from Cebu or Cebuanos, or maybe that's just the most active ones that we know from FANHS.
Yeah, going back again to the museum, and to FANHS. I met the Cordovas in 1970 actually, so I have like a 50-year relationship with that family. And
yeah,
it was
with Fred when he was in Stockton.
I knew Fred actually when he came down with the drill team. I met him up in Seattle, but I really got to know him a little better when we had the Far West conventions, the first one was in Seattle, in the Seattle, but the second one was in Stockton.
Yeah.
And Fred and Dorothy brought the drill team from Seattle down to Stockton, and I really got to know them a lot better because we were totally immersed in the Far West conventions and civil rights issues, the human rights issues, just the whole gamut of political, social, economic stuff. And being young and exposed, over the years I got exposed to what my parents have gone through and my uncles and aunts, and then going through the civil rights era in the 60s was really a learning experience outside of, it's something that you never learned in school, and you just lived it. You saw it on TV, you saw the Watts riots, and so it formulated something in my mind to make a difference. What could I do to make a difference? So over the years, you know, I was able to get involved with community stuff, being involved with the Filipino Center for over 40 years. And I had the unique opportunity to see the Filipino Center get paid off in full. A 40-year HUD mortgage loan was paid off in full. And I was a board member during that time frame. And it's kind of unusual for a board member to be hanging around an organization for 40 years, but I did it. And,
Yeah.
and I retired from that. But in 92, I became a FANHS chapter member, and Stockton chapter is number 12 out of 35 plus chapters now. It was to me a fundamental change in my life, in that I could focus in on education to make a difference. So I put a lot of energy into FANHS, in that this was going to be my opportunity to make a nonviolent contribution and change. So I focused a lot of attention in on FANHS to especially get that museum up and running.
Yeah, you know, I want to talk about that museum. Why don't you lean a little forward to on the mic again, if you can.
Okay.
Yeah, only there was a little more.
A little better.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, that's a little better. But you know,
Sorry.
no problem. You know, Mel, the fact that your father came in 31, he went to Seattle, and then he got to when he moved to Stockton. What kind of work did he do then when you were growing?
Well, see, my dad, he passed away.
Mhm.
He passed away in 1954. He was only 49 years old. And in 1950, late 54, or around the summer of 54, my mom decided to move to Stockton because her sister, who was the next oldest of 9, lived in Stockton. So my dad actually only did menial type of work. And because of his health condition, he wasn't able to do a lot of or get into positions, because he wasn't a naturalized citizen until 1947. And this is one of my prized possessions, is his naturalization paperwork. And I keep this on our wall. Whenever you come over to our house, you'll see a little history of our family. But incidentally, that's one of my prized possessions in terms of documents, is his naturalization paperwork. So he passed away in Tacoma, Washington, and my mom moved us down to Stockton, where she remarried a Graziano Rimaletti and had no kids by Rimaletti, but Johnny Rimaletti, he raised us through 67. Johnny and I, my stepfather and I went to Alaska in 1967 together, but he passed away up in Alaska.
Hmm.
And I was at one cannery and he was at another one, and he passed away up there.
Well, so
So,
you went up there to be cannery workers, Alascaros together?
well, we actually were, we got dispatched out of the same union hall, but we never went to the same cannery. I
Hmm.
went to Cordova, Alaska. Incidentally, that's where Fred Cordova he would work there. He was assigned when he did his Alascaro work, he was up in Cordova, Alaska. And that's near the Prince William. It's on the Prince William town by Valdez, where they had the big oil slick up, or the oil accident,
Right.
where the tankers
The Exxon
spilled
Valdez.
that oil.
Yeah.
But my dad went to Ketchikan, and he unfortunately he passed away up there, and I flew back to Stockton, and we had a funeral, and I went back up to Alaska, finished my contract.
How old were you then?
I was 23,
Mhm.
22 years old.
Yeah. Wow. You know, I'm just amazed at how your life has encompassed all these different historical facts. Like your father, he came in 1934, so that was a year after, I believe, the Tidings McDuffie Act. So of course he wasn't a Filipino American national like my dad, who came in 29, who
Yeah,
didn't have to bother with naturalization because he was a citizen. I mean,
yeah,
by virtue of being a national. Your father
yeah,
comes afterwards, and he has to go through the naturalization process, and that's why there's a lot of pride in that certificate that you held up. And then your stepdad goes up to Alaska with you. I mean, well, first of all, you worked in the fields as a high school kid, so you
yes,
got to know what the Monongs were like. And my dad would have been well, he is a Monong, but he stayed in San Francisco and worked the kitchens instead of the fields. And
yeah.
then from the fields, you took the next step with a lot of the other migrant Filipinos and went up to Alaska. Can you tell us a little about that experience? Because a lot of people here in the Valley don't know about the Alascaro experiences as much. Was it
Yeah.
was it hard? Was it hard to be in?
Being an Alascaro, actually, I was. Let's see, I'm trying to go back. When I graduated from high school in '65, I was 18 years old.
Mhm.
Okay, 19, 18, and by the summer of '65 was actually the first time I ever left the house. You
Mhm.
know, under the umbrella of the parents and everything. And that was the scariest part, in that, um, you know, you didn't want to mess up when you were out of state. Okay. But the nice part about it was, I had to go to the Seattle area, to the Union Hall in Seattle, in order to get dispatched.
Mhm.
So I had family in Tacoma and Seattle that I could kind of hang out with, because I had to stretch that dollar out, trying to figure out, if I didn't get hired in right away, I'd have to go down to the Union Hall every day to check in. And a little personal story was, when I first went up there, I waited for a week before I actually got called to assign to a cannery. And I found out that my dad gave the dispatcher, and I won't use any names, I
Mhm.
know the person. I don't think he's still alive now, but he gave the dispatcher, I found out he gave him $50. And back in '65, $50 was a lot of money. But all of a sudden I get, you sit around in that Union Hall with a bunch of other guys, and they just listen for your name. And all of a sudden I heard, "LaGasca, LaGasca, Melton." I said, "Damn, man, hey, that's me." So long story short, you go take a physical and you do some exams, and they send you up, they fly you up to uh, the cannery, into a location near the cannery. Turns out that Orca um, was a little small, I guess, fishing village, like, but the planes that came into Cordova, Alaska, and you had to take a boat. Okay, we all got on a boat and went to the cannery. So
Mhm.
there were no roads to the cannery.
Yeah.
So it was quite an experience. The I guess the administrative part of it wasn't too hard, but I was just concerned about being able to hang in there with the type of work. It was brand new. I ended up working in the cannery as a slimer, a Filipino over the. I went up to 3 seasons.
Yeah. Well, wait. What does a slimer do?
The slimer is when the fish come off the boat, they come up in a conveyor belt and they go up into the cannery. And the first guy that catches the fish are the sorter. So he's sorting out all the fish.
Good ones and the
And
bad ones.
he's the good ones, and you'll see big trout.
Mhm.
Every once in a while, a big trout will come through the line because they fish with the big fish nets.
Mhm.
So the fish nets don't care who's out there; they just pull everybody in. But the sorters will sort it, and then the fish will come down into a line of guys that come cut the fish and clean them, and then it goes to a Filipino who sets it up to be cut in to pack into half-pound or 1-pound cans.
Mhm.
So
So, what did you do as a
and then it
slimer?
goes from there into either a half-pound can or 1 pound, and then it's pressure cooked. And
All right,
then
but what did you do as a slimer? Do you?
at Slimer, I grabbed a fish and I have a razor sharp knife, and I would clean all the insides, take the head off, and send it down the line.
How long per fish did you have?
That you couldn't do it. You couldn't. I probably spent less than um, 35, 40 seconds, less than a minute on a fish. Otherwise, it would build up on you. You know?
So it's sort of like Lucy and the Cakes, or
Yeah. You
they come
just
to the
you
conveyor
just
belt.
you work out a routine, and I have to share something. Another thing that I've never done in my whole life was I worked a 24-hour shift once. The
As a slimer.
As a slimer. What happened was the cannery controller, the guy that controls the fishing boats that came in,
Mhm.
made a mistake, and he had two boats come in, and each boat will hold over 100,000 fish.
Mhm.
Okay, the fish are on ice, but he's supposed to separate these boats a week at a time. We had two of them come in a week. Excuse me. That's not the corona.
Yeah.
Uh, but anyway, he had two boats come in, and the fish had to be canned, or it would spoil.
Mhm.
So it was like, okay, here we go. They made an announcement, and they said these you're going to end up possibly working 2 shifts and maybe 3. So we started our first 8 hours, and then we went into our uh, overtime shift. And the third shift was called the penalty time. So you worked a day shift, a night shift, and then a graveyard shift. And at the end of that graveyard shift, they give you a whole day off to recuperate,
Okay, yeah.
from being up all day.
So tell me, did you feel exploited, or did you feel like, oh, I'm making overtime?
Well, it's a little bit of all the above. I think I was more honed in on the overtime, but to me that experience was twofold. One is that I made a ton of money, in that one day, But I also learned that the guys next to me were maybe 10 or 15, maybe 20 years older than I was. And there was no way in heck I was going to show any fatigue when this guy, who may have been 40 or 50 years old, was standing next to me sliming and not showing any signs of fatigue. Okay.
So, all
So,
right. So, as a slimer, can you do the sliming action? Here comes a fish. You get it
well,
chopped. You
here
slice.
comes the fish down the way. So
Yeah.
you grab the fish and you get a good firm, and you take its head off, and then you slime it and then you move them down. So in less than a minute, you've got that fish, where it's just basically a chunk of meat, and it goes to the other filler feeder who cuts it into different size chunks.
Right.
So you're in rain gear because there's constant water flow around you,
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, there's just you gotta hose the place down because it's a big mess.
All right. Now, of course, I have to ask forbearance from the animal rights gods to forgive
Yeah.
me but this is for history. I'm indulging in the story. I'm interested in it because you don't hear much about the Alascaros. We know about historically about how they have been compromised or how they were exploited um, because of the conditions. And we know from our history books, Larry Itliong, our Filipino American hero, was up there. He was in Lascaro and he lost 2 fingers or 3 fingers. He was known as 7-Finger Larry.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about, I mean, did you ever feel like you were in danger of losing fingers? I guess it's
Well,
easy if you're,
it no. After you were after you watch and then you learn the technique, and I think it's a part of a instinct is to be on the safe side, and if you couldn't do things fast and exact, you did it slow and very meticulously. And if I was ever um, I guess I was pretty conscious at the time, and I took my time, so I didn't slice my fingers up. But there were positions in there. After the fish is canned and it goes into the pressure cooker, there's a position in the warehouse called the inverter. Okay, so there's several hundred pounds of canned fish that has to be flipped over on a mechanical unit. Now that's where I could see that you can possibly get hurt. And I'm not sure exactly what happened with Larry, but he must have may have got tangled up in some machinery.
did you hear about people getting hurt up there?
I have, but it wasn't too often. Most of the guys up there it was mostly a fatigue thing,
A what thing?
just fatigue,
Oh,
being
fatigue.
overworked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but
here,
they would give us time off, to recuperate. And after working that second shift, you get 35 minutes off,
Mhm.
per 4 hours. So it wasn't like a continuous thing, but it was just you're on your feet for 24 hours.
Yeah, boy. And I guess for a young guy, this is kind of was this a kind of a Filipino fantasy? You're making all this money, you're up there and out in
It
the beautiful Alaskan,
it
wilderness.
was as a young guy. I had these. My focus was to come home with all my fingers and everything, with a pocket full of money. I wanted to work. I was so focused on working that I knew if I made it back okay, I would be able to give my parents money to buy myself whatever I needed to finish school and possibly buy a vehicle. Now, if you can imagine this, back in 65, 66, 67,
Mm,
I would come home with close to $2,100 in my pocket
mm,
after working, less than 2 months. And what happens in the canneries is the fishing and game warden would close the fishing season down to allow the fish to go upstream, so there would be this good cycle of salmon. So they determined the canning season, and they would come in and shut the season down actually prior to our 2 month contract. When you went into the union hall, you would sign up for two months. But I've never worked, I can't remember ever working longer than 39, 40 days,
yeah.
less than 60 days.
So here's the thing that gets me about you telling these stories as an Alascaro. I've been to the museum and I've seen that Alascaro uh, poster, or the section of the museum,
Yeah.
and I've stood at the museum in close proximity to you. This is before social distancing, and I'm looking at the poster or the exhibit on the wall. You're next to me. You are the Alascaro exhibit. you, you, you're
Well,
the
you
Alascaro.
know, Emil, I have to share this with you. I actually have a binder of history of my pay stubs,
Mhm,
pictures of the cannery,
mhm,
and just kind of when I was young and making all this money, uh, and got, working next to the older guys, and just experiencing that work environment that they done for years.
mhm.
There was no way I could hang in there to do that type of stuff. So I made sure that I got the education outside of the farm labor work to survive. So it was, to me, it was part of a important part of my personal education to experience that, and I come out with more of an appreciation for the folks who lived that their life, their entire life. So I have a total different perspective, a total respect for the work that they've done and their contributions, even though it's not documented to the point where it's not like the doctors and the lawyers and the Indian chief. These were the frontline workers that fed us.
Yeah, you were there in 65 and 64. And
65, 66, and 67.
so this coincides with a lot of stuff in American society. 64, Civil Rights Act, 65,
Absolutely.
65, the Voting Rights Act. People are
Absolutely.
recognizing people of color, primarily African Americans, and you're part, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You have African American blood as well as Filipino American blood. And
Yes.
so what was going through your mind during this time? Because there is now a milepost in our society that says, okay, civil rights, voting rights. You're walking along the path. Are you seeing quick changes, or are you seeing that it's still a long way to get to the promised land?
It was a long ways to go. After, like I said, after hearing my mom and my uncles and aunts talk about social norms, uh, I kind of uh, established I guess, a end goal, and that was if I was going to make a change, to to put myself into a decision-making position where the buck stopped with me. I didn't have to go to someone else for approval. And to get involved with things that made fundamental changes in people's lives, So when I got involved with the Filipino Center, that sort of fulfilled that uh, desire to help with housing.
Mhm.
Housing, you know, the Filipino Center is basically a housing project, and to be able to to provide the basic element of a roof over your head, to me is the is part of the a critical part of the survival in the United States is to have a roof over your head. So being a board member for 40 plus years was to me fulfill that need to help in that particular area. But the whole education of being around, like you said, the civil rights, being an adult during those time frames, kind of led to a lot of things. And another important thing was the Filipino People's Far West Convention, in which I learned to that not only your political vote was important, was that your economic vote was extremely important, where you spent your money.
Mm. So
So
it's,
when
when you talk about, there's a little garbled there, the Filipino Far West Convention, what was that exactly for people?
that was a result, to me, that was a result of the civil rights uh, era of the riots in 64 to
Mm.
65. Um, that was an attempt to get Filipinos, specifically Filipino, young Filipinos together
Yeah.
to talk about social, economic, educational, political, health issues, just the whole gamut of things that we're faced with in society, but focus on Filipino American.
Yeah. You know, the thing is, when you mentioned the 64, 65 riots, a lot of people, they don't even get in their history books these days. And people who are old enough to remember it, or who have,
Mm-hmm.
you know, been fortunate enough to see some things in the news or have read about it, these were riots all throughout America.
Yeah.
They were all throughout in, not just in Chicago, Detroit. They happened all over, and there were there were there were reports that said, "Hey, look, the reason why we're having this is because primarily African Americans are excluded." And essentially, when they said African Americans, they meant people of color. They meant
Yeah.
there are some that the world is black and white, and we need to bring these two worlds together. And that was as stark as they put it in 64. It's funny how now here we are 2020, and
Mm-hmm.
while we have overcome a lot, we, like I said
Yeah.
earlier, we have so much more to overcome, especially now that we have seen this virus pretty much accentuate all the divides that exist.
Yes. And this is where the museum comes in a very critical component, in that you know, we're kind of struggling to get a vision together of the museum. The museum is allowing people to experience other outside of their race, and even within the Filipino community, allow them to experience what other Filipinos are doing,
Mhm.
the contributions of other Filipinos, not only in America, but throughout the world.
Mhm.
If
Yeah,
you if you look around the world, uh, here's something that I kind of picked up. I need to validate this, but I'm hearing that a lot of the Filipinos around the world are Ilocanos because of their adventureness. They ventured out into the world, um, and established themselves all over the world, but specifically in California and in the
where
United States.
where did you say you digitized it there a bit? You said,
Okay, it specifically, the Ilocanos seem to have this adventurous
mhm.
nature to them, and not being afraid to venture out into different parts of the world. And I can see that if life in the Philippines was tough, maybe there's something outside of the Philippines that would help their lives, give them a better life. And they were willing to take that chance, to risk, to take that risk to leave the comfort of their own country and venture off like my dad did.
Yeah. Well,
And,
yeah,
contribute.
definitely. Yeah. My dad in Loag saw, you have to imagine, my dad was born in 1906, which
Yeah.
is just a few short years after the Philippine-US war, where
Yeah.
the US ravaged the countryside. What was left for these people under the American flag, but to say, okay, well, it's crap here in the Philippines because the military just ravaged the country. Well, go to America. Why not? What's there to lose, right?
Yeah.
And they came or wherever, but you know, they were under the American flag. So in the 20s, my dad skipped Hawaii, didn't go to Hawaii, came straight to California. So, you know, what I find fascinating by this, you know, you have all these perspectives, and we're talking about the Far West Conference and how when you saw the civil rights era and you being Filipino and Black, were there conflicting kind of feelings, or was there a sense of unity, how we were all together?
Well, that's an interesting point because to share a little bit of my personal life, um, growing up, I knew that I've heard comments over the years among within our own family unit of the Black. You know, on my mom's side, she wasn't Black enough to be Black. Okay, so she had that social norm, and it was an ignorance on the part of other people, not her. And she kind of drilled that into our minds. It's not our problem if someone has a problem of us being integrated. That's their problem. And then on my dad's side, his friends, some of his so-called friends, were no longer friends because they told him, well, why did you marry outside of your race? You know, why did you marry a Black lady? And there were some issues that boiled up to where they broke their friendships. My dad and his so-called friends, they were no longer friends because he married outside of his race. And he says, I can remember one of the statements saying, "Oh, by the way, Margie is lighter than you, so you can't talk about somebody being Black." And if you see a picture of my mom, she is a light-skinned
Yeah.
Black person.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to me as a sibling, you know, experiencing this. You have to kind of fall back to one reference, and that reference is a person. We have to start being human beings, and then we can be Afro-Filipino, and we can be everything else. But if we're not human beings first, then we're all the major disconnect. And I
Yeah.
think that's what's happening with society now, is that we're losing the fact that we're humans, and maybe this virus will bring us all back together and recalibrate our thinking to
Well,
say that, hey, if we don't look after each other, then who is?
Well, I'd like to hope that. I'd like to think you're right, but this idea that bringing us together, but this social distancing, I mean, right now we have protests going on from people who feel that social distancing is, I saw someone holding up a sign that says social distancing equals communism, which is really weird. It's almost like evidence that our public education system has failed. I mean, to put something as ignorant as that on a protest sign and go out, well, you know, you're using your free speech rights, but you're using it to spread ignorance. And, you know, and so I don't know if the virus is bringing us together or pulling us apart. Ideally, it brings us together because we care, right? but it seems to be pulling us apart because as we social distance, it's making some people, crazy in a way. Oh, now it's making me sneeze. Oh man. Okay, so now we both have sneezed, but I use a little, and I'm in my quarantine closet too.
Well, you brought out some good points, and one of the things that I've learned since the president has been a president, and having gone through Obama and then this president now, I've seen a world of difference in the leadership and how compassion, especially a world leader, can make a ton of difference, and how propaganda and selfishness can tear things apart. Now, you just mentioned something about people protesting against the social distancing. To me, those people are part of the small percentage who are selfish, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, well,
They're in there for their own interests
yeah,
and not your interests at all.
yeah.
Okay, so once you recognize that, you'll find that that it doesn't take much to figure out when people are starting to call you names or putting labels on you, who they are.
Yeah, here's a label that's interesting about the social distancing protesters.
Yeah,
One right-wing conservative guy
absolutely.
who said he compared the social distancing people with Rosa Parks. Can you believe that? Rosa
Well,
Parks, yeah,
see that person just showed their true color.
and
Okay.
their true ignorance too. I mean, these people who are protesting social distancing aren't in the back of the bus; they're in the front of the bus. And
Yes,
they want
absolutely.
they want to
And
put more distance.
and that kind of raises my feathers up. And I hate to be sound negative, but I truly believe in some people the Civil War is not over with.
Oh, well, that's the truth. That is the truth. And this is the connection really with history. This is the connection with appreciating, knowing, and being able to learn from history. And every time we think we have learned history's lesson, then we forget it and then we have to relearn it. I mean, isn't it funny how this whole thing now between, you know, the president saying, I have absolute authority, and then saying, oh, no, the governors, it's up to the governors.
Yeah.
This is like 2020 states' rights, right? This is states' rights all over again. So we know that what happened the last major time it was an issue. Well, it's always been an issue. It's just, back in the 19th century, it created this war, and now in the 21st century, who knows what's going to happen? Mel, it always goes back to history. It always goes back to the museum. And in many ways, just talking about your life, our lives, everyone's life. I mean, yeah, hopefully when people listen to this, they'll see the points in which they fit into the timeline of the story we're telling, that begins with the American national or the immigrant in Luag or in vegan coming to America and then coming to California, having a family, if they're lucky enough to have a family, and then that family member then going off and reliving another generation of the Filipino experience, be it in the fields, as an Alascaro, as a person at Sandia Labs, the esteemed Sandia Labs, as a kid who's able to go on scholarship to college and have a career where very few Filipinos have been. How many Filipinos were at Sandia Lab?
This is just a handful of them and a handful of blocks. But the people that were there, we communicated, and we were pretty much on the same page.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, at Sandia Lab, Sandia finally opened up its mind and said, "Hey, we need to recognize the Hispanic and the Black and the Asians and the gays and lesbians and the women on site." And what they did was to me was the best thing that Sandia could ever do, was that they funded a program to allow these different groups to voice their thoughts and do some outreach.
Mm.
And I'll tell you another little personal story. Back in the 90s, I was part of the Asian Outreach Committee, right? So I was a member for a couple of years, and I noticed that the Chinese and Japanese would always have a speaker, Japanese and Chinese.
Mm.
And the Filipinos, they were saying, well, how come we don't have a Filipino speaker? They said, well, who are you going to suggest? And we made our suggestions and nothing. So the following year, they said, well, we're going to have an election of officers. So they said, who wants to be the chairperson of the Asian Outreach Committee? And I just went crazy. And guess who became the chairperson of the Outreach Committee?
Yeah.
Mel.
Yeah.
And guess what? That next year, I invited Fred Cordova to Sandia Lab to speak to an audience in an unclassified environment during Asian Pacific Month. Actually, it was in May.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we paid him a nice honorarium, and we flew him down here and flew him back, and so that's what happens when you get into positions where decision-making positions where the buck stops with you.
Yeah.
And you look after folks that you're familiar with, so to speak. And
Yeah. This is the way it happens. Grassroots, to up on top. I mean, why aren't there more Filipinos in the, in the federal government, or, at the top of the corporations? It's because of it's the old boy network equals the old Filipino network. And
yeah,
if there's not a network established, then you don't have the people. Like you could take the elevator up, and then the guy who takes it up has to send it back down, and then
that's right.
back down, and that's the way it works. And you reach out and you lift up, and we've got to do more of that. But
Yeah,
history is the teacher. It gives us the lesson about what we need to do. And this is, once again, it's the important part of the museum. If we haven't seen the progress, the history should be on our walls. It should be in our exhibits, and it should be in our programming, like these conversations. And so, Mel, we've been, I don't want to go on too long, but it only means that we're going to have this conversation again, or a different conversation, to go deeper into some of the things you experienced with the conference with the Cordovas and the Far West Conference, and how that translated into doing more for Filipino workers and civil rights. And we will add other people to the list that we interview. I just thought that this was easiest to do now because, we can do Zoom, we can get it up quickly. And like I said, to be continued. So Mel LaGasca, I appreciate your willingness to come and share these stories. You're not off the hook because we have to go through that life story thing that we went through. I've got other things to ask you about. We got through the Alascaros, and we got more to talk about, the Filipino Center, et cetera, and also about the museum. So thank you for being the first person that we interview on this is our COVID-19 Stockton FANHS Museum initial programming. And I thank you at home, wherever you're listening or watching, if you're listening to this as a podcast, because It might be easier because of the bandwidth, or if you're seeing it online. I hope we have enough bandwidth to put all of it online. But thank you very much for joining. I'm Emil Amok. This is Emil Amok's Takeout. We've been talking with Mel LaGasca. Mel, thank you very much again.
Thank you.
All
Take
right.
care.
So Mel,
Gallego,
oh yeah, I know.
over in the Bay Area, and you know, the folks over there, of course, Evangie,
Yeah.
she's another. I mean, you can go on and on about the people that that are making a difference, and everybody makes a difference. They don't have to be the leader of the pack. They just have to be part of that pack, and that's why I really have seen a future in the museum, and that people like yourself coming on board are going to make a fundamental change in the museum, in the way it progresses. And to me, the museum has unlimited potential, and it takes the right people with the right background. You know, you with the journalism background bring in a tremendous amount of media type of knowledge, and you're able to get us to talk where we normally don't talk. You get us to express ourselves where sometimes it's hard to get people to express their feelings or their background or whatever. But and there's people that are coming onto the board that have those I call it subject matter expertise, that they're willing to share.
Well, look, I appreciate the kind words you're saying. I just know that there are things that I do, that I've done in my career, that you know, the museum is both an education source, information source, it's history, but it's all the things that journalists basically, you know, we want to do the news. Like, what don't we know, right? Tell me what's new. Here's what's new, right? But every now and then, what's in the past is new because we've forgotten, or we're ignorant, or we haven't learned it. So history and what's news can be linked if it's told in a way that that really builds on the connections, or makes new connections to the things that are happening today. A lot of things happening today, and it kind of bothers me that we don't know the history better than we do, and people don't know the Filipino history. And that's why, you know, when I was talking with Terry and some others, I said, well, we got to talk to Mel. We got to talk to Mel. We got to talk to Peter. We got to talk to the people in the Bay Area too. But we, you know, we have programming. We're, like you put it, carriers of history. We have the programming inside us. We have the ability to express what this, you know, where we are in this history. And fortunately for us, we have people like you who have so much history. Just, I mean, this Alaskan thing, sliming a fish, is kind of interesting. I mean, it's like, it can be dangerous. People, you know, work hard, but if you can let people understand what that means, then you can relate that to, wow, the Filipinos, they had to go from the fields up to Alaska to keep making a living. They just kept following the work.
Migratory work.
And so this is part of us. And so if I've lived in, let's see, from the time I was in, you know, high school to college through, you know, in my career, if I lived in 10 different cities in 7 years, that's migrant broadcast work, right? We're the new migrants, or, you know, that's the way careers were. And now with technology, I guess we could stay in one place and just sort of Zoom each other, I guess. I don't know. So anyway, well, look, thank you, Mel. And
Thank you.
hopefully now, is Gail okay? Is she fine?
She's she's doing okay. We found out that she's got some issue with her eye now, so I think it's all part of growing older, and
Oh yeah, she's got
yeah.
the, but you
But
know, yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's related to macular degeneration.
that's what
But
it is.
is it? Oh, well,
That's what it is.
there's a Chinese herb that you take. Now I know a lot of people are a little skittish about Chinese stuff now because it's hard to get because of shipments and whatnot. But there's a China. I don't know if it's if I know my mother-in-law who's in her 90s. She takes this Chinese herb that my wife got wind of, and it actually has improved her vision. I'll send you a link an email.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know what the doctors are saying, but and I don't know how far along and if it can help her, but I know that, like I said, my mother-in-law is 90 something, and
yeah.
she is
The ophthalmologist has her. The doctor has her on some medication or some over-the-counter vitamins actually
yeah,
that allows her to help with her vision.
you know, it's important. You know, the
Yeah,
people need to know that medicine comes from natural products, and then the pharmaceutical folks, you know, they put it through the corporate process, they brand it, call it Viagra or what, or they give it a name, you know, and you know, oh, or aspirin, right? Aspirin was just a bark from a tree, and then they, oh, let's call this aspirin, you know, and they sell it. So sometimes you can heal with food, you can heal with things that are natural. And so I'll send you a link to this if it's interesting.
okay.
Check it out. Um,
Okay.
thanks again. I will
All
see
right.
you tomorrow, hopefully, maybe.
Yeah, we may
Zoom.
have company over here, so I'm not sure. We're not supposed to have.
I know you got to stay social. We won't tell on you. That's all right.
But I don't know if the grandkids are coming and we'll all be in our mask and everything and practice social distancing within our parameters. But I'll
Yeah.
see how it goes tomorrow. I'll let you know.
If you're there, it's cool. If you want to be there, you can. If not, I'll send out the
Yeah,
invite. You're free to join in, but also free to take care of family. And but thank you for this.
you're
And
welcome. Thank you.
and we'll do it again. We'll do a second chapter at some
Yep.
point.
Thank you for your time and all your
Oh well,
contributions.
this is you know, it's a way to just to try to make sure that we can stay afloat with something, right? It's tough to be
Absolutely.
closed. Tough to be closed.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, Mel, you're welcome. Thank you. All right.
Salama.
Take care. Salamat. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.